Best and worst languages on Duolingo. Spicy. I just did something that, to my knowledge, nobody has ever done when talking about Duolingo. And now I have some statistics about Duolingo that I'm certain they'd prefer I didn't share with you. Because they were kind of difficult and tedious to get. Between this carefully hidden information and my expert knowledge of linguistics, I think I can give a definitive list of the best and worst languages on Duolingo, and the best way to exploit Duolingo for the fastest, most effective learning possible with them. If you're wondering what I'm even talking about, they're a giant in language learning and have the toilet time language learning market cornered. You've almost certainly heard of them. You've probably got strong feelings about them. If you speak English, they've got 39 languages to choose from, including languages that are often under-resourced, like Zulu and Navajo, or made-up languages like Valyrian, Klingon, and Latin. But not all the courses are the same, like at all. And I don't just mean how they don't have the exact same sentences in the exact same order for every language. I'm looking at you, Rosetta Stone. I mean the quality and what is actually offered. Rosetta Stone is the McDonald's of language software. You get the same thing no matter where you go. Is it great? No. Is it terrible? No. You're going to learn the same content in the same order with the same pictures, and that's fine. Anyway, Duolingo. Today, I'm going to tell you what I think are the best and worst languages to learn on Duolingo. I've already got another video explaining how I optimize study with Duolingo, so today I'm talking about which languages are duotastic and which are dog water. My ratings will not just be based on how much content and how many features are offered either, so some of my recommendations may surprise you. This isn't, can I learn a language on Duolingo? Because of course you can. You can learn a language from takeout menus if you're a language junkie jonesing for a fix and you're hard enough up for that new word dopamine hit. What I'm going to answer is, should you? This is going to be a long video, but I've got useful little nuggets throughout. And for the kind of person who's into this sort of thing, I've got graphs. This is going to be a fun one. I'm Dr. Taylor Jones, and this is your last reminder to study before you lose your streak. This is Language Jones. Today's video is not sponsored by Duolingo, by the way. In fact, it's sponsored by Lingoda. Lingoda is not an app, and they don't have 39 languages. It is a language school with 5 languages, but they're amazing. And spoiler alert, if you have the time and the motivation and a little bit to invest in your language learning, they're absolutely what I recommend for French, German, Spanish, and Italian, especially if you want to get comfortable speaking and listening quickly. They offer a few different approaches like Teams, Sprints, which is intense, and Flex, which is more my speed. But for any of their courses, they can get you from absolute beginner to C2 with features that tailor the learning experience and make Lingoda the perfect partner based on your individual goals and needs. It's actual, real-life teachers who are native speakers and experienced teachers. And their course content is both really good and really well organized, and also just glossy and professional. I was blown away by their French classes when I first tried them, and for this promo I thought I'd do a little bit of Spanish, which I half-heartedly studied a decade ago for a couple of months, so I'm what YouTube would call an expert. I can now say with confidence that their absolute beginner material is really good and an effective way to start from scratch without being too scary and intimidating. The teachers are all from all over the world, so I just learned that Chilean Spanish kind of has pitch accent. But also, as one of the teachers put it, there's no grades and we're all actually choosing to be here because we want to be here. It's great. Anyway, thanks to Lingoda for supporting the channel. If you want to try Lingoda, click my link below in the description for up to 25% off. Now back to the video. Okay, so if you've been under a rock or whatever, Duolingo is a language learning platform that originally started as a nefarious hack to surreptitiously crowdsource translations for training AI, but quickly pivoted to just being a language learning app. That's actually not that uncommon. You're watching this video on a website that started as a dating app. You either start as a dating app or live long enough to see yourself become the dating app. Anyway, back in the day, they had a confusing tree structure that gave you lots of freedom to navigate a course however you saw fit, but it resulted in a lot of people just kind of dicking around and not learning anything, which is bad for retention and recommendations. It was also largely incubated by the community, which just means that you and some buddies could get together and design a course and record all the audio, and it wasn't as centralized as it is now. The last incubated course was Yiddish, which is a super weird course that has a lot of interesting politics and history behind it, and ended up being a compromise that doesn't satisfy anybody, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Newer courses are more centrally planned, and newer courses also rely more on AI-generated voices. This is not necessarily bad, but also not necessarily great either. Oh, and they're a business. Did I mention they're a business? They want to make money. That's what businesses do. So this channel's also a business, and if you like what I do here, please like, subscribe, and comment for the algorithm. And if you really love it, you can support me on Patreon at www.patreon.com/languagejones or right here on YouTube with super thanks and super chat. So there's different ways you can do the whole business thing in the language game, but they've settled on ads and gated content. 4 mistakes and you're locked out for a little while, and memberships that get rid of the ads and give unlimited content. That and having a good mix of languages with a lot of content for the usual suspects. Ever hear of supply and demand? If you want to succeed in the language learning sphere, you basically have to have a decent course for English, Spanish, German, French, Italian, and maybe Mandarin and Russian. Yes, 2 billion people speak Mandarin, so you'd think it would be in high demand, but way more people are clamoring to learn Spanish, especially in North American markets. In fact, I actually made a whole spreadsheet with tons of information I would need for this video and did a little light quantitative analysis. I can't help myself. It turns out that if you want to sell language courses in the North American market, interest in Spanish blows everything else out of the water, followed by French, followed by Italian, German, and Mandarin at all approximately tied, and then Russian. What this means in practice is that I'm leaving a ton of money on the table not talking about Spanish. But for Duolingo, it means that French and Spanish have a metric merde ton of content, pardon my French, and all the features. There's a Spanish language podcast. They have entertaining stories every couple of lessons where you hear actual voice actors doing actual voice acting. They're aligned to the CEFR levels. But also it's where you see new features A/B tested, and it's where they have the most incentive to keep people hooked. Last year, I said I was doing a certain amount of French on Duolingo in a day, and at that rate, I'd finish the course in a few months. They keep changing the course around, and now not only am I not done, although some of that is on me, I did slow down, but I also now don't know exactly how much there is to go. I know where I am in the current section, but the number of lessons in the next section is a mystery. As a quantitative social scientist, I hate not knowing the numbers. So I did the tedious work of taking lessons in every single language they offer and evaluating the course content, the course quality, and the course length, which they have made very difficult to ascertain for the normal user. You can find it, but it takes a bit of futzing around, pardon my Yiddish. I looked at all the languages they offer, and I'm going to go through them all to tell you whether it's worth using Duolingo or not. I'm going to assume you speak English and you're willing to put in some effort, but you don't want to waste your time. I'm also assuming you're willing to spend some, but not an exorbitant amount of money, so you could choose to do something else, and you're not strictly locked into Duolingo. Some of the languages and courses naturally group together, so I'm not going to just repeat myself saying the same thing about Italian and Portuguese or whatever. So let's get into it. First, the courses are all wildly different lengths. The longest is Spanish, which has content mapped to the CEFR levels and teaches through completing B2, meaning when you're done, theoretically, you should be able to study for C1 level content. B2 is way better than a language learner on a polyglot potty break has any right to expect, and from the languages I've studied seriously incorporating Duolingo, I can say they do in fact deliver on this promise. However, there's a huge caveat. Spanish currently has 286 units. Each unit has around 5 lessons, with around 5 skills each. Breezing through them in a Romance language still takes about 2 minutes per lesson, so we're talking minimum 10 minutes per skill, 50 minutes per unit, and they generally have stories as well, so realistically, for the average person, we're talking at least an hour per unit, assuming you're not confused by anything. My meter for that is broken since I look at things and just go, oh, they're teaching datives or whatever. So there's a tremendous amount of material, and it will take anywhere between a full-term pregnancy and pre-K to complete it all. That said, it took me a lot longer than that to get to B2 in French using traditional methods, including visiting France, so it's probably a pretty decent approach if you don't want to go out and comparison shop. Lingoda, this video's sponsors, obviously have a ton more real interaction with native speakers, so you get confident talking, but if you build in a real speaking practice, you can probably make this work. And there are those who claim to have done so, and it's totally plausible to me. French is very similar, clocking in at 272 units currently. And of course, coming in at number 3, as everybody expected, is Norwegian. This is actually super weird, but the order of course length goes Spanish, French, Norwegian, Japanese, German, in descending order, then a big drop off to everything else, slowly trailing down to 0. It turns out their course length is sort of correlated with the number of learners, but there's some very weird outliers. The correlation between length and number of learners is actually 0.72, and it drops with one of them on a log scale, which you kind of wouldn't expect. Norwegian is an outlier with way more content than you'd expect, and Hindi actually has way less than you would expect. Look at this chart for Z-scores for number of learners on Duolingo. Now tell me, where would you spend your R&D money? And at the risk of doing their R&D Q4 planning for them, look at this graph of language course content versus number of learners on their platform. Anything to the right of the line has more content than you might expect given demand, and anything to the left is less content. Norwegian is punching well above its weight, but if I were Duolingo, I'd be focusing on getting those on the left of the line, and especially the ones higher up on the graph, more and better content ASAP. But course length isn't everything, and that's why I said more and better. Those most common languages tend to have better voices. Sometimes they're real voices, and sometimes they're just better AI. But you really have to show out when you're going to have a course for the big European languages. What about everything else? Well, first of all, the Scandinavian languages are all of approximately the same quality, and given that they're mutually intelligible, but asymmetrically mutually intelligible, the Norwegian thing actually kind of makes a lot of sense. Not only that, but the course lengths map really neatly onto Google Trends for searches for travel and hotel in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, respectively. Weird. And honestly, in general, all of the content for Germanic languages is good. German obviously has the most robust course, but they all seem approximately comparable. I should add that the Yiddish course was the last one done through Community Incubator, and it didn't used to have enough audio. They seem to have added a lot of audio. It's all native speaker audio and not AI voices as far as I can tell. But Yiddish in particular is a very weird case because there's a governing body that claims to have developed standards, but whose standards are only followed by academic Yiddishists who are almost never native speakers, and the standard was never actually a real-world standard used by a lot of people, so much as an aspirational standard before World War II to put Yiddish on equal footing with other European national languages. And then there's the estimated 250,000 native speakers in the US who speak the descendant of a non-standard and somewhat stigmatized dialect. YIVO Standard Yiddish is basically the grammar of one kind of Yiddish with the pronunciation of another, and its closest real-world use was in the Yiddish theater. What native speakers in Brooklyn or Kiryas Yoel actually speak is the descendant of a third, secret dialect. And to satisfy both academic Yiddishists, who are frequently secular, non-religious, or even anti-religious, and the most religiously observant Jews in the world, who are the hundreds of thousands of native speakers, they decided to compromise. So Duolingo Yiddish is academic imagined formal Yiddish grammar spoken by native speakers with an academically stigmatized accent. Think a thick Tennessee accent reading a Shakespearean monologue. It is totally unhinged, and I love it. To be or not to be? Reckon that's the question. Whether 'tis nobler to suffer the slangs and arrows of outrageous fate. It's like that. Back when they had comments too, the comment section was filled with questions like, what is babka? So yeah, the Dutch course is great, the audio is great. Dutch is one of the most fun languages for an English speaker, and the course is longer than you'd expect at 123 units. I have no doubt that you could learn Dutch to a decent level with Duolingo alone, so all 8 of you learning Dutch, give it a try. As I say in Dutch, success. It's really close to English. Moving on. Hebrew is another with native speakers who are notoriously difficult to parse, but I say tough cookies because that's how people talk. Unfortunately, it does not have audio on all the words in the word bank or even all the sentences, and it's a language that does not write vowels, so you'll need to do a lot of outside study to make it work. And their course organization is unusual. In French, a skill will have 5 lessons. You might learn 3 IR verbs, and you'll see them in first person singular and plural in one lesson, then second person and so on, until you put it all together. So one skill had like partir, sortir, dormir, and they added thematic vocabulary about hotels. Il a dormi dans un hôtel, il est sorti de l'ascenseur, etc. Duolingo Hebrew, having been incubated by members of the people that literally gave us the word zealot, has skills that are 13 lessons long, and they're just a brain dump of, in some cases, 45 verbs in the same conjugation class. Good luck differentiating mevaker, mevakel, mekabesh, mekabel, megale, megaler, and so on after your verb lesson. You would think that that would mean a negative review, but honestly, Duolingo Hebrew is one of the best things out there. It's wild. I am just over halfway through the course, and I've started listening to intermediate podcasts like Zman Ivrit, and I can literally listen to a 30-minute podcast and understand every word. But I had to supplement it with Payalim.com, Wiktionary, and a couple of grammar books. For any other language, I'd say it's not worth it, but for the caliber of the other self-study materials out there, it's one of the best things that there is. While we're on Semitic languages, their Arabic course is okay. It's Fusha, it's modern standard Arabic, and it's relatively short, coming in at 46 units. I won't say not to do it, but I would only really recommend it as a supplement to a more intensive study with something like Al-Kitab fi Ta'lim al-Arabiya or tutors or whatever. but it's good for mapping the right vowel contrasts. Hard pivot to Slavic. Russian is pretty good. 95 units, so it's probably around A2 or B1, given how the Romance languages are structured. The audio is good, and I think the lessons do a really good job of drilling case marking and conjugation, especially with mapping it to more natural translations. If it were me, I would absolutely use Duolingo rather than, say, the Penguin Russian course, which I've attempted to slog through a few times with a grammar. It's not fun. Czech, on the other hand, clocks in at 88 units, but I find the AI audio leaves a lot to be desired. That said, there's not a ton of resources for Czech, but without outside study, there's no way you're going to effectively learn to pronounce some of the sounds. The computer voice is just not close enough, and they're the kind of thing that takes some instruction. I assume the teaching approach for case marking is similar to Russian, and I could see using it as a supplement to something else. There's a surprising number of online tutors and podcasts for Czech, so if I had to learn Czech, I would probably use Duolingo regularly as an addition to something like Teach Yourself Czech, listening to podcasts, and scheduling time with online tutors. Ukrainian is an even shorter course with 51 units, but the audio is slightly better. You're not going to learn Ukrainian to fluency on Duolingo, but I can see getting a taste and having fun. Polish clocks in at only slightly more with 67 units and decent audio. You have more options here, including Rosetta Stone and others, but again, I think they do a pretty good job with the Slavic languages. Romance languages, they're all good. Go for it. You have a ton of other options, so if Duo is not for you, that's cool too. Literally everyone has Spanish, French, Italian. Most have Portuguese of either flavor, spicy or original. And so really the only standout here is Romanian. If you've never studied Romanian, it's the Romance language that never forgot it was originally Latin. They only have 62 units, but that's one for every person interested in studying Romanian. I'm kidding, they actually have over 1 million people studying it right now. Speaking of Latin, they actually have Latin. Well, 22 lessons, but it's real audio, obviously not native speakers, and you can hear the influence of their first languages in their accents, but it's fun. You could bang it out for fun in under a month and then study Latin more seriously with something real like Wheelock's Latin or Latin, an intensive course. I really like this book that I found on the street, by the way. Link in the description. By the way, this is as good a place as any to point out that their translation is not one-to-one, and I think that's actually a really good thing. Story time. I vividly remember being poolside at the family farmhouse in Seyon and having my parents quizzing me on how to say things in French. And I was just incredibly confused because they kept asking me how to say super Germanic phrasal verbs like get up, get out, look out, lie down, etc. One thing I really like about Duolingo and Romance languages is that they do not ask you to map the words to Romance language equivalents, or the easy equivalent, but rather they force you to make connections to the harder stuff to map from English. So you'll map to go out and to leave instead of depart. An extreme example will have literally every word in the sentence be different in the translation because it's a non-literal translation. So you get j'ai encore mal translated as it still hurts. This is brilliant. The Celtic languages are all of approximately the same quality. I am free associating and writing the script, so yes, I did just jump here based on Caesar's Bellam Gallicum. Anyway, they seem to rely heavily on real audio, which is great. From length alone, I'd say they're a decent introduction, but aren't going to get you fluent. But there's so few people who speak Irish fluently, for example, that they'll probably get you exactly what you need to converse with people who do speak it, but code switch. Comparing all of them, you really see how related the languages are. Irish is a very short course, and both Welsh and Scottish Gaelic are almost twice as long at 66 units, 112 units, and 120 respectively. For East Asian languages, I can say that their Mandarin course is meh. It might help with reading and pronunciation. It's very short. You will absolutely not be getting to HSK 6 with it. You probably would be lucky to get to HSK 2. But if you want to use it as a game in addition to actually studying Chinese, the AI-generated audio is quite good, and you get used to some interesting tonal contours. I first learned Chinese with the Xin Shiyang Hanyu Keben, a paper dictionary and cassette tapes. So I understand there's newer and better approaches, including integrated Chinese and all sorts of apps. Shout out to the Pop-Up Chinese podcast, by the way, which is a lot of fun, but strangely not on Apple Podcasts. For Japanese, same but different. You'll get a decent foundation in all the scripts, and you start to develop an ear for pitch accent, and you'll get solidly A2 or B1, I guess. But if you really want to speak it, you need to use something else like tutors and Genki. If you're just going to Yokosuka for a week like I did, and you really only need to know onegaishimasu, itadakimasu, kudasai, then their 221 units will be way more than you need. So not a bad start, but not a complete solution. Now is a good point to explain the relationship to difficulty. The almost 300 units of French get you very comfortable in French because like 45% of English vocabulary is from French anyway, since the French conquered England in 1066. But Chinese and Japanese and Korean are just very different. I mapped all the Duolingo Duolingo languages. Jeez, Dingalingalang. I mapped all the Duolingo languages to the Defense Language Institute categories, with Category 1 being the easiest for a native English speaker and Category 4 being the hardest and requiring the most time. And you can see that Duolingo in general has more content for easier languages, meaning you'll be even better at them when you're done. Japanese is an outlier, so you might be pretty good after the full course, but the DLIFLC basically says it takes twice as long to learn to gain equivalent skills in Japanese as in French. So it seems like you'd be at approximately A2 in Japanese after completing the amount of Duolingo that would put you at B2 or even C1 in French. That's a Japanese learner problem, not a Duolingo problem. Korean is all right. Vietnamese is all right. For both, you'll want outside materials and guidance on pronunciation, although the audio is good. I just don't think I could master an 8-tone system just from an app. Actually, on second thought, I really don't think Vietnamese is one you can get very far in. Hear me out. Vietnamese doesn't really have pronouns. For those of you playing the home game, I mentioned pronouns, so take a shot. But seriously, they use kinship terms and social honorifics, and so the pronoun, such as it is, changes depending on who is speaking and who is listening. It's like the Japanese system, but galaxy brain. I'll be understood if I say watashi wa, even if maybe I'd construct my masculine identity better with like boku or whatever, but Vietnamese, and I'm no expert, the idea is you basically can't just pick a pronoun. It's literally contingent on the social act of speaking and who you're speaking with. I didn't dig super deep in the course, so maybe someone can correct me, but I'm thinking maybe just use it as a listening supplement, if at all. Greek, Hungarian, Turkish, all decent, but you can probably find better materials as your main content and just use Duolingo to supplement that if it's fun and motivating for you. Now we get to the worst. Indonesian is relatively short with 69 lessons and has bad AI audio. Some of the initial content in the very first lesson was confusing, including word bank items and later sentences that you had just never been taught. Hawaiian is similar, including a weird glitch where one word bank item was the entire phrase Game of Thrones. Although I will say the audio is decent, except on that example. Given how endangered Hawaiian is, this is a start. Hindi was dog water. I know enough about Hindi to know that I could not hear important distinctions in pronunciation from the low-quality AI audio. Specifically around breathy voice, yes, that's the real linguistics term, and nasalization. I'd honestly take Rosetta Stone over Duolingo, and that's saying something since I don't think Rosetta Stone's Hindi course is exactly one of their strongest showings. But at least you can hear the real voices. Swahili and Zulu are both okay, but they just lack the length to teach you enough. And while I liked how they introduced some adjective and relative agreement in Zulu, I think their approach will be confusing in the long run. The audio is mostly good, and I'll use it to supplement when I go back to Zulu because there are not really a lot of good resources. But I'm a little disappointed with the course, especially given how much fanfare they give it when they want to talk about how they have African languages. Also, for what it's worth, Zulu is tonal, and as with basically everything else out there, they just sort of ignore that. Anyway, I put it above self-study with CLS Nyambezi's Learn Zulu, but you could probably do better with the complete Teach Yourself Zulu and its audio, or even better, the brand new Routledge Colloquial Zulu. Routledge Colloquials are real hit or miss, but this one looks pretty good, and sometimes includes tones. I'll probably be reviewing it on a live stream later, so I'll save that for some other time. Navajo. This is the language that Americans used in World War II instead of coming up with a code because it's just impenetrable to outsiders. There's 170,000 speakers of Navajo in the US. This course, as it is, will not make it 170,001. But it's a nice way to hear some of the spoken language. I don't think it teaches the grammar well, and while the voices are real community members, it also shows, since you can literally hear them turning the mic on and off to record, saying things twice, and sometimes sitting in front of a fan or something. I really wish this one were better, and I would love to see better resources for Native American languages in general. For Navajo, this can be a good supplement to actual study, but you're basically looking at moving to the Southwest if you actually want to learn it. Conlangs. What, you thought I'd skip these? So, Valerian is quite good, and I'm annoyed at the language itself, but the course is solid. Klingon is a great course, but there aren't really native speakers, and because it was designed to be difficult for humans to speak, I find that some of the phonological and phonetic variation is not well captured. Some of the speakers don't differentiate well between h and h, for example, and the adjectives are a little bit iffy. Still, it's a lot of fun and a great exercise in doing something intentionally as unusual as possible in all domains, syntax, phonology, and so on, while still being technically learnable and speakable for a human. But who am I kidding? If you're interested in Klingon, you've already done this course. Blah. Lastly, Esperanto. The course is good. Esperanto just annoys me for a lot of reasons, but the course organization is good, the audio is good, and you can absolutely get a strong foundation on Esperanto from the Duolingo. The language is designed to be easy. if you're European, and you could probably get good with anything though. So to tie this all together, for Romance and Germanic languages, the courses are generally great, and you can get to a decent level using Duolingo smartly. See my other video on how to do that. But they're also a heavily saturated market and you have a lot of options, so only do Duolingo if you find it fun and actually effective. You'll know pretty quickly. For Hebrew and Yiddish, it's an indispensable resource, but you'll sound funny in Yiddish. Es ist schwer zu sein Yid. For Indonesian, Navajo, and Hindi, it's a complete waste of time. For Arabic, it's mostly a waste of time. For Swahili and Zulu, it's an okay supplement when you're first starting out. For Asian languages, it's a very good supplement when you're first starting out, but it's not going to get you fluent, and especially not in Vietnamese. Maybe you'll be able to order in a restaurant and shock locals. Hard languages like Hungarian and Turkish, you could use it to supplement real study, but don't mistake it for real study. Honestly, I think the main thing I got from this is that it's a great introduction where you can go between different languages and just get a little taste for free and decide if you want to get serious about study later on. And that's a great thing. For some of these languages, if you're wired the right kind of way, it can be surprisingly good. It's kind of blowing the second edition of the Routledge Colloquial Hebrew out of the water. I have to do a lot of outside work to make it work. For many languages, it's just a taste, and then you'll have to go actually learn somewhere else. It's a taste of a tongue taste. I think I need to stop. Special thanks to all my patrons. If you want to become one, you can at www.patreon.com/languagejones. You can also support the channel right here on YouTube with super thanks and super chat. Please leave me a comment or question if there's anything you wanted to know that I didn't cover. If you liked this video, check out this one, where I show you how to make better use of Duolingo. You could also drop into my live streams. I'm currently studying Hebrew on live, but I'm planning on going back to Persian and at some point getting around to Spanish, because business. Maybe even back on Zulu. You never know. Until next time, happy learning.